to give effective feedback that works, episode 483.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
Productive two-way feedback. That's something that we need to have with students. And administrator from Chicago, Jordan Catapano, has been talking to his teachers about this topic. So, Jordan, what makes effective feedback, and what are the problems that you see with how feedback's working in many classrooms today?
One of the things that I've noticed after spending a lot of time in the different teachers' classrooms is that teachers are spending so much time trying to give really effective feedback to students. And there are so many teachers who are working their butts off in some really brilliant ways to share with students some comments on their work. I've seen teachers be really creative with offering like recording verbal feedback, one-on-one conferences with students, and writing so much in response to the work or papers that students submit. But what I notice is that after the teachers have worked so hard to provide all of that feedback and information to students, there's sometimes very little that students end up doing with it. And so all the hours of work that teachers have put in to help students learn and grow with the skills that they just put into their homework, a lot of the time that those hours, there's no payoff in terms of what students do with that. So in some conversations I've had with teachers, I've encouraged them to make that feedback two-way, meaning instead of all of the feedback going just from the teacher to the student, trying to help that become more of a dialogue where the student is intimately involved with the reflective portion of their work. What I've noticed is that feedback and reflection really go hand in hand. And so if the teachers are doing all of the feedback and that's it, and there's no reflection on the student's end, then they're not as likely to benefit from all of the work that they both put into what they did.
So what do you mean? Describe how this might work, say, on an essay. That teacher goes and gives all this feedback on the essay. And then what?
Yeah. So what I've noticed with students is that, first of all, one of the things that they look for is the grade. And so if that grade is written right at the top of the paper, they kind of see, okay, I got a B on the essay. That's the main source of feedback for me. That's the grade that I'm most concerned about. Then it doesn't matter what the teacher wrote, because the only reason why the teacher wrote it is to justify that B that I got on this essay. And we kind of want to get around that thinking a little bit, because we obviously want students to focus on the quality of their writing and how they can take steps either with this work or with future pieces of composition to really strengthen their skills with that. So a two-way dialogue might look a little bit different instead of just the teacher writing loads of comments on that next to the grade. I've seen some teachers really do that's helped with students is instead of assigning a grade, especially when it comes to essays, they focus on the process. So long before that final paper is turned in, the teacher has already offered some commentary on what they see is effective or needs work on the student's composition. Instead of the student just reading that and then trying to work on that on their own, the teacher has a conversation with that student and might ask the student some questions where the student is forced to evaluate their own work. They might ask, what do you think are the portions that are the weakest for you, or maybe the hardest that you struggled through composing? Or what are you most proud of? If I were to set you up with another student to coach them, what do you feel like you nailed and that you can definitely give to another student? And that helps students be much more reflective about their own work, and then they can have a format to digest anything that the teacher might share with them.
I was Skyping with Alice Keeler because I was having a problem with Google Classroom, and she was helping me with some things. And she told me that she's starting to tell teachers at the top of the classwork section, she has something named for feedback, or I can't remember the exact words she used. I'll try to find that and link in the show notes to the blog post where she wrote about this. Because what she told me, I'd never heard before, which was the moment you give a grade, they don't read your feedback. That you had to give them that document back without a grade, but with feedback, and to tell them that you will grade it once they improve it based upon your feedback. Is that kind of what you're saying with saying, give that feedback, give that conference before you grade?
Yeah. And I think that's true even beyond just essays as well. I've seen there's one teacher had a brilliant idea. It seems so simple, but instead of giving a grade, she would give back, in this case, it was a math class. She would give back students' work. They had a chance to evaluate themselves based on some of the comments that she had written, how well they did on certain math components that they were focusing on. And instead of getting a grade, they had to complete a reflection and correct any of the errors that they had and kind of explain their thinking now that they understand it a little bit better. And then she would issue them the grade, or they would work together on figuring out what that final grade was for the task. But yeah, once they see the grade, they feel like that is the stamp of finale on it and it's done. One thing I've seen some other teachers do that's really effective with feedback is they just ask students before they assess something, what do you want feedback on? And specify something that you want me to share with you. And students are much more keyed into what the teacher shares because they've already identified that they have some stake in what's about to be shared with them.
Love that. So you said two things. You said reflection and correction. And I am huge on correction. I mean, for example, right now, my students in 7th and 8th grade are learning MLA papers. And I actually will not allow them to turn it in until we've got it perfect. That I'm constantly giving them feedback, because the problem that I used to have is, say a kid turns in an MLA paper and they make a 60. Well, there's 40% of formatting an MLA paper that they don't know how to do. So I want them to know how to do it. So we go back and forth and they're like, oh, I'm so tired of correcting it. And I'm like, well, it has to be perfect. But I feel like that's a process of learning, and I actually won't put in a grade. They have a 0 in the grade book until we get it perfected, and it turns magically into 100. And I know that may be extreme, but this whole reflection and correction, I mean, if we're trying to teach, we don't want to just give a grade, do we?
Right. And can you imagine how frustrating it would be for someone to share feedback with you and then you had no opportunity to ever reflect on or repeat that task to get better? And the feedback is useless at that point because there's no way for you to apply it. So the more students see that there's some applicability in how they can actually use the feedback that's given and that they have a stake in it and a role in crafting that feedback, then the more ownership they have and will likely apply that to the skills and things that they're doing either on that specific task or on the next one that's like it.
Wow. So as we finish up, if you were going to pull all your teachers in and give them sort of a encouraging 30-second or 1-minute pep talk on effective feedback, what would you say?
Good question. Big question. I would just remind them and encourage them that, hey, feedback and reflection go hand in hand. And it's not solely on your shoulders as the teacher to say or point out every single thing that the student did right or wrong with this particular work. Transfer some of that onto the student's shoulders as well. So they could look at their own work, look at the rubric and the standards, look at what you're sharing with them, but have them articulate to themselves what it is that they feel proud of or what it is that they want to work on with this. And they're much more likely to own that and to take the steps to improve their learning and performance as they go.
So important. Effective feedback unlocks learning. So does reflection and correction. Thank you, Jordan.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.